Hey everyone. One of today's topics is going to be managing food production by using standardized recipes. So what do we mean by when we say standardized recipes? Well, a standardized recipe is just that. It's a standard recipe that helps us assure a standard product will be produced. Standardized recipes not only help us control how and what is produced, it can help us control costs. It can help us standardize what is used, and so that could be in terms of ingredients, but it could also be in terms of equipment and staffing. And standardized recipes really allow us to better forecast production. And when we talk about production, we're talking about food production, but we could also be talking about production schedules. We could be talking about staffing schedules. And certainly, standardized recipes help us forecast and plan for purchases. So, what's the process in standardizing a recipe? Well, this slide's a little bit busy, but there is a true process when we standardize recipes. So, one of the first things that we do is we assess what is currently done. We look at the ingredients, we record the ingredients, and the procedures that are used to prepare the recipe. Then we plan what we want to do. We might select the yield for the recipe. We might plan out what we need to do for the new recipe. Then we implement it. We test the recipe and we make sure any adjustments that we've made to it actually work. And we know that they work because we evaluate them. So there may be a taste test, we check for the accuracy of the yield, and then we document any changes that may happen. And then we retest it. So standardizing a recipe is really about testing and retesting many times until the recipe is perfect. There are lots of sources of standardized recipes. USDA has a whole recipe file of standardized recipes. You can create standardized recipes from new recipes. So there's lots of ways that we can find standardized recipes, and there's books upon books that have standardized recipes in them that we can use. But something to keep in mind is that a recipe is truly never standardized until it's tested in your facility. So your oven may cook differently, your staff may cook differently, they have different skill levels. So until the recipe is actually standardized or done in your facility, tested in your facility, it's not standardized to your site. All right, so let's talk about scaling up and scaling down recipes. So scaling up, we're increasing the number of servings that we may be making in a recipe, or we're scaling it down, we're cutting down on the number of servings. And when we're talking about servings, we're really talking about yield. So there are many different ways that we can scale up a recipe or scale down. One of the most popular methods to use is the factor method. And the factor method is actually really is an easy way to determine a new yield for a recipe. So how do we do this? So when we use the factor method, we first determine whatever the current yield for the recipe is. And again, when I'm talking about yield, I'm talking about the number of servings that are going to be produced. Generally, that's what we're talking about in yield. In terms of the factor method, how many servings are going to be produced. And then we decide what's going to be our new yield. What do we want our new recipe to make? Then we divide the base or the current yield into whatever it is for the new yield that we want. Okay, let's take a look at an example here. So for example, if the current yield of a recipe is 100, so it makes 100 servings, but you want to make 200 servings, to figure out the new yield, you would divide 200, which is the new yield, by 100, the old yield, and we would get a factor of 2. And then we would take this factor and we would multiply this by all of the amount of ingredients in the recipe. So let's take a look at how that could be done. All right. So here we have an example, and the current yield on this recipe is 50, but the desired yield is 175. And we would figure out our factor by dividing 175 by 50, and that would give us a factor of 3.5. So then we would take this factor of 3.5 and multiply that by each of the ingredients in the original recipe. So I'm looking in the column that says 50 servings, the recipe amount. That's the current recipe. And the first line there says margarine 12 ounces. So if we multiply 12 ounces times 3.5, we would get what? We would get 42 ounces of margarine. Now, we wouldn't probably represent that as 42 ounces of margarine. We would divide it by 16, and we would get 2 pounds, 10 ounces of margarine that we would be using in our new recipe. And then we would multiply each of the other ingredients, the flour through the cooked chicken, by 3.5 to get what the new amount that we would put into the recipe. All right, so here's your Easter egg. Here's your hidden treasure for this slide set. If you can calculate out the new factor and then use that new factor for each of the ingredients that is listed on this page, then you will get an additional 2 points extra credit on this quiz. So again, if you can calculate out and figure out what the new factor is going to be, and then use that new factor for each of the ingredients that's listed here, then you will get 2 points extra credit. And so to get that extra credit, do the calculations and then email me the answers on that. And you will see this page in the slide sets that are posted online. So there are other ways to scale up or scale down a recipe. So we had the factor method, and another method would be the percentage method. So the percentage method works by calculating the total weight of the ingredients and then calculating the percent of each ingredient. So this percent of each ingredient stays constant regardless of whether you scale up or scale down the recipe. So let's see this in action. So this is an example of the percentage method. So we have the original recipe, total weight of 11 pounds, and the carrots in the original recipe are 2 pounds. So when we calculate what percentage the weight of the carrots of the total is, it is 18.2%. So this percentage remains the same regardless of whether we go up in size of the recipe or down. So if we come to the final column here, if we wanted the new weight of the total recipe to be 50 pounds, we would multiply 50 by 18.2%, and our new weight for the carrots would be 9.1%. Excuse me, 9.1 pounds, not percent, 9.1 pounds. So direct reading measurement tables are yet another way to scale up or scale down a recipe. So these tables are or provide easy conversions. The tables are typically set up to be divisible by 25, so 25, 50, 75, 100. You would look at the table and it would tell you how much of the ingredient you would need at different yield size, so 25, 50, 75. So this is a really easy and convenient method for recipe conversion. So this slide, I know this slide is a little bit busy, but this slide gives you a nice overview on the advantages and disadvantages of these various methods. So we've talked about the factor method, we've talked quickly about the direct reading tables method, and we talked about the percentage method. One method we didn't talk about was computerized recipe adjustments. This is a really incredibly easy method, requires no math skills. You would just have a computer program, you would input the information on the current yield, and it would calculate out what you wanted for the final yield, whether you were scaling up or scaling down the recipe. The thing with the computerized recipe adjustment is that these programs can be a bit expensive, so that's something to think about when you're deciding which method you want to use. All right, so that's it for this recording. I will also tell you that this advantages and disadvantages of methods, I've made this into a handout that is available in the folder for this information. So you can go there and you can take a look at that handout. And I'm just going to give you a hint, it might be useful for the quiz. All right, thanks so much, guys.